The Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and your local cable provider presents Cable Reports. Join us now as Cable Reports brings you up to date on current issues facing the Commonwealth through discussions with your local legislators and other policymakers from across Virginia.
From the General Assembly and the City of Richmond, I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports and Comcast, connecting Virginians to their government. We're pleased to connect you this morning with Delegate Steve Landis, Chairman of the House Education Committee. Thank you for being here, sir.
Thanks, Woody. Glad to be here.
Congratulations and condolences. You've got a lot of bills out of your committee that are now in the Senate. You're considering Senate bills, but you're also a budget conferee once again. Talk to us about the responsibilities entailed in that.
Well, as a House budget conferee, I, along with 5 of my other colleagues on the House, will work with our Senate counterparts in crafting the final budget and budget compromise that will put together, if you will, or pieces of both the House and the Senate budget. And then we'll have the General Assembly, both House and Senate, vote on that and then send that on to the governor.
And we'll talk about that later on, because there is a fairly significant area of contention in terms of the budget this year. But tell us a little bit more about your chairmanship of the Education Committee.
Well, as Chairman of Education, I get a chance to kind of work on all the issues related to K through 12 and higher ed. And it's been a great opportunity this year to be chairman of the committee. We have got lots of reforms we're moving forward and trying to get the Senate, our Senate counterparts, to agree on related to standards of learning, assessment reform. We're trying to delay the A through F program for a year so we can take a better look at that and see if we can have something that will benefit our schools a little bit more. And we're looking at lots of other pieces of legislation that impact higher ed as well.
And you're also vice chair of the Appropriations Committee in the House.
I am, and I get an opportunity, obviously, to work closely with our chairman, Chris Jones, and that's been a great opportunity this year. And I think we have a good House budget, and our subcommittee chairman on the Appropriations Committee worked very hard, along with all the committee members. And we spent Sunday going through that and voting on that this past weekend, and that worked well, I thought.
And the budget is about a 500-page document, I think.
It is, and a lot of times people think we're making huge amounts of changes, but the base budget is pretty much intact. We, both the House and Senate, have made changes to that, and some significant changes. But you know, the introduced budget and the base, what we consider the base budget, is still pretty much intact.
And of course, your district includes a pretty large swath of Albemarle County, and agriculture is a big part of the economy there, is it not? It
is, and Western Albemarle, agriculture and forestry are still 2 important parts of the local economic efforts that occur in Albemarle County. And there's an active Farm Bureau chapter in Albemarle County, and there are folks that have anything from horses to vineyards and wineries to cattle and produce other crops as well.
And there was a fund created, I think, under the previous administration to help the smaller counties engage in economic development in terms of farming and timber. Talk to us about that.
That was the Agriculture, Forestry, Industrial Development Fund. And actually, I had an opportunity to carry that bill for Governor McDonnell. And I know Secretary Haymore is continuing on with that in the McAuliffe administration. It's a great fund that really can leverage smaller amounts, $50,000 to $100,000. Grants from the state to be matched by localities for economic development projects. Could be some existing business related to agriculture, or an expanded or new business, and it's a great fund's shown great success for the projects that have been granted so far.
And I think exports have increased over the last 5 to 6 years from the Commonwealth to a lot of different countries. Soybeans have become very, very popular. How important are soybeans to our economy now?
Soybeans are a huge commodity to export, especially to China and India and other places around the world. And it has been a great boom and boon to our economy in Virginia and for those that produce soybeans across the state, including folks in the Shenandoah Valley and Albemarle County and the areas that I represent.
And of course, timber is another product that's used domestically but also exported.
It is, and in fact, a lot of hardwoods are exported around the world, and we have great timber tracts and great foresters and lumber manufacturers that actually are producing that timber that's going around the world. And of course, we use a lot in the United States and in Virginia as well.
And I take it that industry is coming back. It got hurt by the recession as a result of the housing crisis, but I take it that it is improving.
It is, and I think their new construction with housing is starting to go back up, so to speak, and that will benefit that industry. But the exports really have helped them in this downturn.
Now back to your work on the Education Committee, you had mentioned several subjects, not the least of which are the standards of learning and the need to effect some reforms. Talk to us about how that all got started and where it is now.
Well, on the House side, a number of us that have been involved in education on the Education Committee and also in the House Republican Caucus have been listening to constituents over the last number of years related to the number of tests that we've had for our standards of learning, especially in grades 3 through 8th grade. So we wanted to see what we could do to reform that, really bring the number of tests down in that grade levels, and really try to make the assessments and how we're assessing our students to look at that piece as well. So the legislation has both a reduction in the number of tests in grades 3 through 8 and also is looking at the assessments and allowing schools to provide alternative assessments for the SOL, especially in those grade levels. We think that'll make a great change, put less pressure, if you will, on just the test, but more importantly, provide some relief to the teachers and students and parents in what we've heard the last couple of years.
Now, those tests are still important because they provide a barometer of where our students are relative to other students within the Commonwealth, throughout the nation and the world.
Right. And in fact, Woody, one of the things we've tried to do is balance that reduction, but also making sure the rigor and the content that students are obtaining the knowledge related to those mechanisms is still there. And that measurement is so important because that's how we determine how well our schools, not only locally compared to other divisions, but also across the state are doing, and how well our students are doing. And that's something we still need to continue to measure. And we still need to have high standards because it's a competitive international world now for our students when they're graduating from high school and then college. And we've got to make sure they're prepared.
And I understand some of the issues surrounding the administration of those tests related to the fact that a lot of them required rote memorization versus the ability to think critically.
Exactly, and multiple choice test is sometimes the mechanism we default to when we're looking at assessments and testing, and we realize that more and more employers and in higher education, people are looking for students that can think critically, work as a team, if you will, and working through problems and problem solving. So we're trying to, again, have that knowledge of content and the knowledge at the level that children need to have, but also have a better understanding of critical thinking and a problem solving and moving forward. So that's the adjustment in the assessments. And
of course, teachers felt under a lot of pressure, as you indicated, because they were evaluated based upon the results of those tests. Sure. And many of them started, quote, teaching to the test.
Right. Well, that's a little bit of a misnomer because every teacher teaches to a test or assessment, whatever that is. These alternatives that we're looking at and what other school systems are going to be providing in the future, they're still going to be teaching to those, so there's still a teaching to the test. But I think the teaching to the test was the multiple choice testing mechanism that we've utilized. Now there will be some times and opportunities when the SOLs still need to have parts or components of that, but we're looking at more essays, we're looking at more alternative assessments and looking at how students do, not just the rote memorization.
Now, how are teachers faring under the current budget proposals, especially as that relates to the Virginia retirement system?
Well, there will be additional dollars in the budget for education, and we're trying to move forward related to the state's share, if you will, for the VRS. In fact, the House budget we've moved up the state share in paying that by about 3 years. We were phasing that in to the rate that the VRS Board of Trustees had set, and at 8%, and now we're moving in that direction. But we're actually funding in our budget and moving forward 3 years on that deadline. The House and Senate have a little bit different take on that, so we'll see what the final outcome will be. But we think that's an important measure to move forward as quickly as possible. It's a structural issue within the state budget, and more importantly, the bond rating agencies are really looking at what states are doing related to their pension and retirement systems.
Now, even though your district may not encompass the city of Charlottesville and the great university there, there are a number of really good community colleges and institutions of higher learning in the Commonwealth. Talk to us about why they are so important.
Well, in Albemarle, Piedmont Virginia Community College does a great job as a great feeder for the University of Virginia, which is a great flagship institution in Virginia. But the community colleges play a dual role, not only preparing students for transfer to four-year institutions, but also the certificate and workforce development needs that the Commonwealth has. And in fact, we have different measures that will really include the community colleges even more this session for workforce development. And they, again, play such an important role, and they are a great asset to Virginia.
And talk to us a little bit more about the importance of the 2+2 program, for example, and the tuition assistance grant program.
Sure. The 2+2 program and the tuition assistance grant program obviously benefit the community college system, but the students that are participating in those programs. And it is so important that they have access, providing the opportunity to get into college through kind of what I consider the front door. We consider going from high school to four-year institution. Sometimes people would say, well, the back door may be the community college system, where a student really doesn't know what they want to major in, or maybe doesn't have the grade capability and is not as prepared as they might need to be to go into college. So the community colleges provide that not necessarily back door, but that other door for students to enter higher education. And the transfer agreements and grants provide that access so those students can get into a four-year institution after the community college experience.
Now, what about those students who need another door? Let's call it the side door. Those students who graduate high school but don't want to go any further. However, they do want a skill so that they can become a productive member of society. Is there any more emphasis on vocational education?
We try to look at that every year related to our career and technical schools in our elementary and secondary systems across the state. But again, the community college system really provides that workforce training for the certificates, for the additional skills that students need for advanced manufacturing, and that is something that's going to be more and more important going forward. One of the things we hear from business leaders, especially in advanced manufacturing, is students that come out of high school with career and technical certificates need that additional training or preparation through the community college system to be able to perform the work and the jobs that we have in the 21st century.
And I know one of the other things that you're particularly proud of that you've worked on for some time relates to virtual schools and the potential for that K through 12. We're doing it now at our institutions of higher learning, but talk to us a little bit more about the potential for those kinds of experiences.
We've had two pieces of legislation this year, one that Delegate Tad Greason had and then one that Delegate Dickie Bell had. The one that Delegate Bell had would set up a separate institution that would really have a virtual school for all of Virginia. And that could be for students that just, for whatever reason, are at home and cannot get to school. They could be disabled students. It could be students that have an illness or they need the opportunity to continue their education but cannot be in school on a regular basis. And we think that's going to be something that we need to really accomplish in the next couple of years, because that's the direction many states are moving. Delegate Greason's bill dealt more with what we call blended learning. It was part of our reforms in education moving forward this year as well. And that would allow school systems to allow a student the opportunity to take their courses in the classroom, but also then, whether it's students there in that school or another school, to take virtual classes for other subject matter that they may not be able to get at their school. And then work with school systems all over the state that offer those virtual learning opportunities. And I think that'll be, both measures hopefully will move forward during this legislative session, and we can see movement in the virtual school program. It's only about 6% usage at this point, I think, if we look at it statewide when we've seen polls, but that's increased even a couple percentages just in the last year. So we're going to continue to see that trend.
Now, what about charter schools? I believe there are only a handful throughout the Commonwealth. What's the prognosis for further development there?
I think a lot of us would like to see the charter school system in Virginia and that opportunity for children to have those choices, children and parents, especially in areas where we have struggling schools and systems. That opportunity should be there. We've not seen that progress, I think, in Virginia, and part of it is, people support our public schools, and charter schools have to be in the public school system. We don't have charter schools like other states do, where they're separate and totally separate of our public school system, and I think that partnership is a good blend. But I think we need to encourage more of those and more of that opportunity for kids, especially in struggling areas of the state, because charter schools can be a great benefit if they're done in the right way.
And of course, some parents decide an additional option is to homeschool their children. And of course, there's been a bill that's been around for at least several sessions now that has gained traction, which would allow a athletic association to admit, so to speak, students into intercollegiate, not intercollegiate, but into athletic programs.
Delegate Rob Bell's had that bill for the last several years, and I've supported it with a sunset clause on it, basically to try it for 5 years, see how it works. I think it'd be beneficial not only for the homeschool students to have and be able to participate. And the polling shows statewide that I think 75% of the public supports allowing homeschool students to participate in high school and junior high or middle school athletic programs. I think it would benefit the schools, not only from the homeschool student standpoint, but I think it would provide a good working relationship and an opportunity for the public school students that may not get a chance to interact and really build friendships with those young people that are homeschooled. And actually, I think the side benefit would be the realization by homeschool parents that maybe public schools might be the right place for their student at some point in that student's public school or school career.
A couple of other bills that have been re-examined and they've been subject to very strict scrutiny is the bill that would grade school districts on an A to F scale, number one, and the second one which would allow a state entity to take over a failing school district. I know there's been a lot of action on those as well. Please describe what has occurred.
Well, there's been legislation related to the OEI, as we call it, the Opportunity Education Institute, that was put in place by Governor McDonald to take over those failing schools. I did not support the original concept, but do support the fact that we need to do something with our failing schools. So the legislation on the House side that would repeal or do away with that has not gone anywhere. There's actually money in the House budget to continue funding that institute to allow them to continue and move forward on the work that they've started just this last year. So we'll see where that goes. The A through F program, I think many of us supported the concept of making it easy for students and parents to see what their schools are doing compared to not only schools within their system but across the state. And a grading system, I think we all have to agree, is the easiest way for parents and students to understand kind of where their schools are. But the Department of Education implemented the A through F grading system for our schools and even complicated the matter even further. So I've got legislation to put or delay the enactment of that for a year for us to look at and see if we can work with the stakeholders to come up with a system that's a little simpler and easier for the schools and the parents moving forward. So hopefully that'll pass through both the House and Senate.
I understand that. Excuse me. One of the stakeholders is concerned of the potential impact on real estate values in communities.
We heard a lot of debate, especially I know Delegate Jackson Miller and Manassas was very concerned about if you put a grade and a school gets a D or an F, that could impact the real estate. People just wanting to move in the community, and that's why I think many of us want to look at the system from the standpoint of what's in the grade, if you will. And maybe rather than just have one grade, maybe we need to have a series of grades for that school. Just like a student gets a report card, maybe the school system needs to have a report card, not just one grade, but maybe a series of grades depending on the different criteria we're able to use.
Now, ethics reform has been on the agenda this year, and I know there have been a number of matters that have passed both bodies. Give us the lay of the land on what's out there and what's likely to come about in terms of resolving whatever differences there are in those respective pieces of legislation.
I think both the House and Senate have passed measures to try to deal with some of the things that came to light in the past year related to reporting, especially related to family members and receiving gifts or not receiving gifts. So both the House and Senate have passed measures to try to address that. I think the House measure was very prudent. It sets up a reporting, if you will, for gifts of anything of $250 of value or more moving forward, and then we would have to do that twice a year. And I think that is something that we need to do. We need to make sure that there is transparency and that that legislators are not getting something, and public officials, not just the legislators, but our statewide public officials as well, and local elected officials are not getting things of value and a quid pro quo, if you will. It's already against the law for legislators or public officials to receive anything of benefit and then to, in turn, do something for a business or an individual in return for that gift. So that's already against the law. We just need to strengthen that. I think that reporting twice a year will help make sure that the public knows kind of what's going on. And we better define what gifts are and basically make sure that family members are included, so if an immediate family member in my household or any household receives something of value, then that's reported as well. I'm very fortunate. I don't recall my son or my wife ever getting a gift, so to speak, but it's important that we have that in there as well.
And I believe it also, at least one of the bills establishes a commission to give advice, counsel, and guidance to members of the General Assembly in terms of the kinds of activities that are allowed and prohibited.
Yes, and in fact on the House version we have a new commission that not only will be the entity that we send the reports to, they can advise us on questions that we have. Right now there's really no one that advises us, is this a gift, is this not a gift, should this be reportable or not. It'll provide better opportunity for us to better define and make sure we're following the letter of the law, and then they will provide advisory opinions to legislators, but more importantly we'll also report that information. It'll go online so that everybody can see what public officials are getting, both at the local and the state level.
Mental health reform has been on the agenda. Talk to us about that and the impact on the budget, if any.
Well, mental health has taken on new importance, especially after the tragedy of with the Deeds family this past last year. And I think we do agree that we need to put additional resources in the system, especially in trying to deal with community-based services, and then also make sure there's better communication between our community service boards and our state hospitals and private providers for mental health or behavioral health services. And both the House and Senate have addressed that a little bit different way, but basically in an agreement that that's something we need to do both budgetarily and from a legislative standpoint. I know Delegate Bell has taken a lead role in that. Obviously, Senator Deeds has as well. We hope we'll get a resolution on that, but that will be an emphasis that both the House and Senate have taken, and I think there's real agreement on that.
And of course, the state is in the process of implementing the settlement with the Department of Justice that will probably require the eventual closing of some of the training centers to move those individuals in those training centers into a community center, that will have a budget impact as well, will it not?
It will. We've started that in the last couple years, and we're going to continue that this year. The Department of Justice settlement obviously has made it clear that we have to move more individuals that can be moved out of our training centers, out into the community. We also have to make sure that community services are there. Some of the sticking points are in Northern Virginia and in Lynchburg at the Central Virginia Training Center. Central Virginia is going to be the last one that is phased out, if you will. Northern Virginia is kind of the first. There's some sensitivity and realization that there are probably going to have to be some state services in some form or fashion for individuals who just cannot get community-placed services. So we're trying to figure out what is the right level of funding and what is the right mechanism to accomplish that for the family members and the individuals, more importantly. So there's going to be discussion between the House and Senate, but we are moving forward with that. We have to continue with that. And as we close facilities, those dollars are being reinvested for those community-based services.
And of course, the major issue you will have to contend with as a budget conferee is the question of Medicaid expansion. Apparently, there is something, Medicaid light, if you want to call it that, in the Senate budget. There's no Medicaid expansion in the House budget, but there's more money for hospitals, as I understand it.
There is. The House budget took a different approach. The governor did not include the inflation dollars for the hospitals. We did. That was, I think, a great benefit to rural hospitals and hospitals across the state. We also put $6 million in the budget for our free clinics and also our community and health centers across the state. That'll provide, for the additional dollars for the safety net, the health safety net as we call it. I think that would be a great benefit. I know the free clinics in the areas that I represent do a great job, and the community health centers, so that'll help them. The House did not include Medicaid expansion language. We are looking at reforms. The approach we took through a separate resolution was to look and have an audit of our system top to bottom. That's never been done before by an outside auditor through JLARC. The Senate basically took an approach, and we're trying to figure out how the dollars work and how really their system works, but I think they tried a system that was done in Arkansas, more of a market-based system. The problem with the Arkansas model, though, is even the individuals that were co-patrons and the majority leader in Arkansas who supported the system has now realized that they went too quickly. The system is not working like they thought it would, and is not seeing the result that they anticipated. So I'm not sure that model is a good one to use, but that will be negotiated and discussed between the House and Senate.
Thank you for being here, Delegate Steve Landis. Keep up the good work, and good luck in the rest of the session.
Thanks, Woody.
Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Comcast, connecting Virginians to their government. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans.